Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York. The New York Times recently published a front page article entitled, "Does the New York Police Department get too much? Perhaps it's asked to do too much." The article raises the right questions. For decades, a succession of city governments have turned to the police department as a catch-all fix for many of society's ills. That's meant deploying a force of 36,000 officers with a paramilitary approach that at times has become unnecessarily confrontational, to put it mildly. After weeks and months of protests against police brutality, political movements have gathered momentum to defund the police and curtail the department's size and mission creep. It's tapping into widespread and growing feelings that the best solution to bad policing may be an end of policing, at least an end to what we've come to accept as the nature of modern policing. Others want to eliminate imprisonment, abolish policing, not just the police, and surveillance technologies, and create lasting alternatives to punishment and incarceration. Yet all these efforts will ultimately need to restructure our society into a transformative one that addresses the human carnage around the world caused by the economic, behavioral, and structural violence people are experiencing daily. From homicide and war to suicide and genocides, every 15 years, on the average, as many people die because of relative poverty and economic disparities as would be killed in a nuclear war that caused 232 million deaths. Every single year, 2 to 3 times as many die from poverty as were killed by the Nazi genocide of the Jews over a 6-year period. That's the equivalent of an ongoing, unending, accelerating nuclear war or genocide perpetuated on the weak and poor every year of every decade. Promises to get tough on crime or modern policing reforms will do little or nothing to produce results or be effective in decreasing those numbers to create the sort of peaceful world we need. Our guest on the show today calls for a restructuring of our police and society to help create a transformative world of radical love and justice that would do away with the shame, disrespect, and humiliation millions of people experience collectively, structurally, and interpersonally. As he puts it, we should demand safety and security, but not at the hands of the police. In the end, they rarely provide either. And we're really so very, very happy and thrilled to have Alex Vitale again on the show. He's professor of sociology, coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College. His book, The End of Policing, has become the Bible, or perhaps as a social sciences, we just simply say a manual, the manual for the movement. And his writings have appeared in the New York Times, the New York Daily News, US Today, The Nation, Vice News, and other news services. He's a much sought after media commentator with appearances on NPR, New York One, CNN, Democracy Now!, Amarcord and Company, among many others, including the Radical Imagination. So Alex, thank you very, very much. I was, I don't know, joking a little there about you now being the creator of the Bible of the movement, but it certainly is an indispensable guide, and it's all over the place. The discussion, the dialogue is here, and you've been talking about this for years, so this must be a very, very important time for you. Things are coming to a head here, and as you know, in New York, we've just been battling over our budget that came out on July 1st. So perhaps we can start there. What do you make of this budget and the attempts to cut $1 billion from the police budget, which is $6 billion, which is, what is it, more than 50 countries' gross national product. So, what do you
Well,
think?
Jim, it has been
Yeah.
a crazy time. The book has been out for a few years and has certainly gotten plenty of attention. And I've been very busy traveling the country before COVID and doing events.
Hmm.
But nothing really prepares you for the kind of explosive attention that has occurred over the last month. But more importantly, we weren't really, I think, completely prepared as a movement for this kind of explosive attention, because the events of the last 4 weeks didn't just fall out of the sky. This is, the result of the fact that there was a lot of organizing going on in New York and all across the country of folks making pretty concrete demands about changes to police budgets and reinvesting that money in community needs, targeted at, resolving real public safety issues.
Hmm.
So in New York, just before Minneapolis happened, the Policing and Social Justice Project that I coordinate, we went way out on a limb and called for $1 billion reduction to be phased in over 4 or 5 years through attrition, cuts to overtime, cuts to some surveillance programs, et cetera, only to find that people wanted $1 billion in 1 year, which is a big ask and would involve things like layoffs, et cetera. What we got, despite some of the press reports, was certainly not $1 billion reduction in policing. We got a lot of kind of moving deck chairs around.
Yeah.
So the school police, which is something we strongly oppose at the Policing and Social Justice Project, got moved from being under the control of the NYPD to being under control of the Department of Education, but nothing has been said in terms of changing their basic functionality. So we still have school police. They're not, the patch won't say NYPD, it'll say Department of Education, but they'll still be police essentially.
The same people. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe this will be an opening to get their role in schools to be radically reconceptualized, but really what we need are trained counselors and social workers and teachers aides, not, school police officers acting like social workers and teachers aides, et cetera. And also, the one most concrete victory out of all this was that they did cancel one class of new recruits.
Mm.
And so that will reduce the head count of the NYPD in a concrete way, but they could have canceled 2 classes and didn't. So there will be new hiring, it looks like, in about a year from now. And they didn't really address enough of the functional scope of policing. And so it's disappointing. That's why a surprisingly large number of council members voted against the budget, and why, folks in the movement remain unhappy. And I think now the trick is, what do we start doing to prepare for next year's budget?
I was just going to ask you, what's the next step here? Because the protesters aren't going away. I don't know how long they can sustain the momentum, but they've certainly done so already. Because people are really, really committed to this, and there's pushback from the unions as well, right? The police union, and the politicians who don't want to be blamed for any uptick in crime and violence and so on and this and that.
Well,
So
that's part of what I mean by when I say that we have a lot of work to do, that we weren't completely ready for this moment, that this work is really embedded in community organizing. It only makes sense when it's tied to real organizing in communities around public safety issues. So we have a lot of work to do to talk to our neighbors, to talk to folks in communities about the strategies that people have identified across the country as alternative ways of producing public safety. Because really more than anything else, this is a movement for public safety, led primarily by people who've experienced a profound lack of safety in their lives, and for whom policing has not been a successful strategy of keeping them safe. And so we've got to go into these city council districts, and we've got to win more people over to this idea that, yes, you have problems, but the solution should not be just more police. And this is kind of the mindset of the mayor and a lot of city council members, is that, well, we've starved these communities of resources. We've allowed poverty and homelessness and lack of health care to run rampant. And then when there's disruptive homeless folks, kids on the corners, drug overdoses, we turn that all over to the police to manage. And the community that's been told the only thing they can have is police, when they see these problems, they ask for more police. And then the politicians say, see, we don't have any choice. We have to give them more police. So this movement is saying, no, we need to actually solve these problems by actually giving people housing and healthcare and jobs for young people and trauma counseling and real support services. And then we won't need so many police. So that's really where we're at, is we got to continue that community organizing, council district by council district, so that next time we have enough votes to really block this kind of crappy budget.
Are you optimistic? Past election, there were some progressive wins. Do you see that beginning to change the dynamics in the city itself?
Well, I mean, those electoral wins are a sign of politics on the ground changing. The rise of Black Lives Matter, the rise of democratic socialist politics, the rise of a kind of deep skepticism about the mainstream of the Democratic Party. And they're constantly, the Democratic Party is always making their deals with downtown real estate interests and corporate headquarters. And they wanted to give the show away to Amazon. They want, they're constantly taking economic resources and pushing them up the economic ladder to the already most successful parts of the economy, in hopes that little bits of it will trickle down. And that just hasn't worked. We've got mass homelessness out there and mass economic precarity and inadequate healthcare services. And then they paper that over with policing. So I think the good news is that a growing number of people see through this. They don't want that politics as usual. And that's why we're seeing so many insurgent candidates, and some of them winning. And I think in next year's city council races, we've already seen, dozens and dozens of candidates come out across the city articulating a very different politics that's not based on downtown real estate deals backed up by heavy-handed policing. They're about creating real racial and economic justice in the city. And that's really the direction we have to be going in.
Agreed. And we've tried to have radical imaginations of form for some of the candidates like Semelis Lopez and Anthony Mendez and so on. But Miranda, I'm sorry, Anthony Miranda. What did you think about what happened in Seattle? Interesting experiment, right? People's Park, sort of like from Berkeley, and trying to take over in a way to show people that we don't need the excessive policing. People can get along and so on. And yet, of course, they were dismantled the other day, right, by the police.
I think, it's a tactic like occupying City Hall, the park outside City Hall. It's I think part of what we're seeing here, right, is this coming together of Black Lives Matter and Occupy Wall Street. And that's why the demonstrations have been so multiracial, and why we see tactics like occupations happening. To create a kind of autonomous zone like that is aspirational. It is about a radical imagination, but it takes time and resources, and those things were not in abundance. And there was this constant outside pressure from the police, from city government, undermining it. And there was violence, and they hadn't had a chance to develop infrastructures to adequately manage that problem.
Mhm.
And of course, no situation is going to be perfect and without harms. And they just weren't able to defend that adequately. But I don't think that's exactly the vision of what we want. But it was a way of bringing pressure and of signaling, that we need a new approach.
Would you comment a little on what you mean in the book concerning procedural justice? Help our audience understand that, what you mean by that, what that's supposed
Yeah.
to do.
So, after the killings of 6 years ago, the death of Sandra Bland and Mike Brown and Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and so many others, right? We were told, don't worry, going to fix policing. This is all a big misunderstanding. And the Obama White House, rolled out this 21st century task force on policing that had all these reforms to fix policing. And a lot of cities like Minneapolis and New York adopted a lot of these things. So what we're talking about are efforts to make police more professional, more closely tied to enforcing the law, less biased, more transparent and accountable. So this includes things like implicit bias training, community policing, body cameras, all of which are designed to procedurally make policing more professional, law enforcement oriented, as I said. So the problem with this is that, first of all, the data just shows it doesn't work. And second of all, if we really understand the nature of the problem, we can just see why it couldn't work. So, implicit bias training assumes that the problems of racism in American policing are unconscious, unintentional, and about individual officers' discretionary decision making. And this is just nuts. First of all, we've got a problem of explicit racism in American policing. Whenever we look at the Facebook pages and the email threads and the chat rooms and the official union statements in some cases, right? There's plenty of racism out there. But also there's structural racism, the decision of politicians to turn the problems of Black and brown communities over to the police to manage means you're going to have racially disparate outcomes. You're going to have violence, and the racial inequality is going to get worse in the United States. So what we need is an analysis that says we need substantive changes to policing. A totally lawful, unbiased, professional drug arrest is going to ruin some young person's life for no good reason. There's no justice in that. It's substantively unjust. We need public health interventions. We need targeted economic development programs that will bring real justice. And just having the officer nicely explain why they're arresting someone for no good reason is not the solution to this problem.
Yeah, you're still getting arrested, whether politely or not.
Exactly.
So, exactly. And what do you think the role of the academy is on this? As the university world, and particularly.
I thought you meant police academy at first, right?
Well, I was going to say,
Yeah, academia, yeah.
Academia, yeah, the criminal justice schools like John Jay, but others who have a concern with a branding of their product. I mean, it is a business model to a certain extent. They need to attract students who are hopefully going to get jobs, or they enter into that to get jobs. So the system expands. You have all sorts of conferences, you have institutes, and you have grants, and fierce advocates for justice. That's the brand for John Jay. Or smart on crime conferences, get tough on crime. I mean, we're full of that. So it's like, what kind of popcorn and branding this and gasoline and so on. The commodification of criminality as a product that can be politicized and used in various political, economic, and intellectual and emotional ways. How do we break out of that?
Well, let me talk about academia first, right? So our politicians have created this massive, criminal justice industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, but this includes police and jails and courts and parole and probation and even money for community services as long as they're tied to the criminal justice system. So it's a huge economic apparatus that's in play. And the academia has responded to this by creating programs to get people, jobs in that system. So they're responding to these economic cues, right? Because that's where the jobs are. And you talk to young people, right, who are thinking about going into one of these criminal justice programs. They're like, well, I want to do something positive for the community. I want to get the bad guys. And the only way I can help the community and make a living is if I take a job in policing or corrections. And I remember talking to some cops who'd come to see me speak in Houston one day, black and brown cops. And I was like, well, when you decided to be cops to help the community, if there had also been the option of a job working in a community center, coaching football and mentoring kids for the same pay and benefits, which job would you have taken? And they laughed and they said, of course we would have taken the community job, but there were no such jobs. And I'm like, that is the problem. There are never those jobs, but the police department, corrections are always hiring. And the universities have just responded to this. If there was a big increase in community service jobs, then we would see an expansion of, social work programs and community organizing programs, but people don't see that as a career path. So people talk about, the commodification of the criminal justice system, but a lot of it is like academia. It's just trying to grab the crumbs out of that system. It's not driving that system. It's not creating the politics. It feeds back, right? The police unions do feedback, the private prisons feedback, the criminal justice schools feedback. They legitimate it. So they do play a role in maintaining this system, but it's about a much bigger politics. It's about enabling a whole set of political arrangements and economic arrangements that around austerity and pushing wealth up the economic ladder. So it's about the trillions of dollars of tax breaks to the rich, not a few $1 million in prison contracts.
Agreed with everything that you said there. And let me just add too, academics have a stake in their jobs and maintaining their jobs and careers and getting the research that will help them do that. So it perpetuates it. As you were talking, I was reminded of some of the great academics, to give one in particular, Richard Cloward, whose work in criminology, delinquency, and opportunity laid the foundation for major program, Mobilization for Youth, which was the framework for the War on Poverty program. So I agree with you. I agree with you. Most academics are not doing work like that. But should we be? Should we be challenging, critiquing the system, and coming up with that? And I consider you one of those critical criminologists who are leading the way in this way. So we do have a responsibility as such, as academics. We can do better, and we can not be beholden too much of the system that pays us, but to try to critique it. So there was that period of time, for a short period of time in the 60s, where you did have the academic world and people like Cloward and Olin developing these programs that did have a political impact. Now, there was a pushback to that as well. But so we're not helpless on this, right? You have colleagues and people that you're working with as well across the academic spectrum, correct?
Yeah, and there are, I happen to have seen some proposals circulating around academia, including in New York, to try to push for alternative programs that might help feed some of the kinds of alternatives to policing that are being pushed for by the movement. So academia is responding a little bit, at least, to this. And, when we look back to Cloward's work and Fran Piven, who worked with him, and so many others, right, they were responding to the cues of a political moment that created space and interest among students. And they obviously were not driven by these narrow careerist visions of what their job was, to just plug students into jobs, like plug that into that hole and that into that hole, but providing, an education of the whole student. So we do need to, first of all, I think, reject that narrow neoliberal kind of view of what we're doing in academia as just preparing people as widgets for certain jobs, and, embrace these deeper criticisms of American society. So I think, there is some of that, but if you're working in one of these criminal justice programs, it's very hard because there are these incredible institutional pressures not to rock the boat, not to upset potential employers of the students that are paying the tuition that's keeping these programs running.
Absolutely. Could agree with you more. I'd like to just touch on a couple of philosophical points. I think the mechanisms of social control, as sociologists, were well aware of the multitude of ways society seeks to control us. Weber's The Iron Cage, the prison of society, in a sense. Are there ways of breaking out of this, or critiques that can move us away from some of the ways that society has been organized, which, as you pointed out, have been rooted in fear and dividing people along class and race and religious lines and gender and so on, that gets us to expand our horizons and deal with not only this society, but societies all around the world that seek to humiliate and disrespect and shame people, and worse.
Well, I know that for myself, a lot of my thinking about this has been guided over the years by David Harvey's work, the radical geographer who's at the CUNY Graduate Center, who is a British critical geographer. And he has done a great job of articulating what this kind of neoliberal political economic arrangement is and how it relies on mass criminalization and also, militaristic, imperialist adventures, so to speak, to keep this system firing along. And that these two things, neoliberalism and neoconservatism, fit together. And what he says is that we need a robust new class politics that's multiracial, that understands the racialized nature of neoliberal capitalism and its legacy and slavery and colonialism and imperial adventures, and that we need a kind of internationalist movement that links the interests of people across borders, exactly the opposite of everything that Trump stands for, right? That race-based antagonisms, xenophobia, pretending that class doesn't exist, while raping and pillaging, while looting the economy, right, for the very rich. So I think that's what guides me. And I think a lot of people in this movement have related analyses as well about imagining a future that isn't rooted in, racialized exploitation.
What about issues like radical love? We just did a show a couple of weeks ago with Cornel West, and we were talking about Stanley Aronowitz and his work in life. And Cornel has been one of those philosophical thinkers like Michelle Alexander, Reverend Barber, who bring that dimension into the analysis. What do you think of that? How could do you think that's something that we need to incorporate into progressive politics?
Absolutely. I mean, I thought it was so interesting when Michelle Alexander decided to move from a law school to a divinity school.
Yeah.
And I had a chance to participate in an event she put together up there at Union Seminary last winter, where we explored some of these ideas. I think that, part of this vision that people are trying to put out is, it has to be about a reconceptualization of justice. we have this incredibly perverted idea of justice as revenge, as punishment, that accountability equals incarceration, and that it's about throwing people away, Xing them out. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like justice. And it certainly doesn't sound like any kind of vision of love and forgiveness in our supposedly, Judeo-Christian society, which of course is not that simple. But so I think, yes, we need to bring back some core ethical questions about what justice means, and love and forgiveness and accountability and restoration have to be central features of any such conversation.
And again, what Black Lives Matter and other groups are trying to address is the deeply embedded inability to do that. We're so embedded in our fears and our ability or need to scapegoat and so on. And the economic system, political system keeps perpetuating it. It's so hard to break out of that, even among those who are trying to liberate others who are at a different level of consciousness. But again, as you pointed out, you started your career, right, as an organizer too. So it is very much about organizing. But tell us a little about the type of organizing you first did that you are, in a sense, still doing, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I had a pretty long background in organizing before I came to academia, and I've continued to be an organizer since. And the first regular organizing job I had was actually in Boston in the mid 80s, working for Acorn, doing door-to-door organizing in Dorchester and Roxbury around, traffic signals and adequate sanitation services, just basic stuff. But that experience, involves talking to people, going into their homes, hearing about their lives, and that was very influential for me. And then I finished college and went to California and got a job at the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness, mostly to do housing policy and some economic development kind of stuff. And at that point, I didn't really understand the kind of neoconservative part of this equation, the way that the criminal justice system plays an essential role in enabling that economic system of exploitation. And it was in San Francisco that this became clearer to me, where following the '89 earthquake in San Francisco, the city eventually just gives up on the possibility of housing people and just turns the problem over to the police to manage and a few social service agencies to try to kind of keep a lid on it. And I was like, aha, right? When we see a problem turned over to the police to manage, that's a symptom of a political failure to address core questions of racial and economic justice. And that's the analysis that's guided me for the last 30 years.
And the police aren't stupid about this. They know they're being used to a certain extent, correct? And they resent it.
Well, they do. Some of them do resent it. I mean, look at that case in Buffalo. The officers pushed that older gentleman over and severely injured him and then ignored him. And then when they got in trouble, everybody in the unit, resigned from that unit. So on the one hand, we're like, well, yeah, those officers should be held accountable. It's good that they were disciplined. And if those other officers don't want to be in that unit, that's great. We shouldn't have that unit. But there's a deeper little interesting truth here, which is, part of the problem in Buffalo was that the mayor there refused to negotiate with the demonstrators, refused to take their demands seriously, right? There was a political failure that he turned over to the police to manage. He said, instead of negotiating this, instead of working out a political compromise, I'm going to suppress your movement through abusive, heavy-handed policing. I'm going to use the police to serve my political interests.
Yeah.
And then if they do something wrong, I'm going to throw them under the bus, even though they were doing my bidding. And that was resented by those officers. The officers were like, wait a second, you're going to send us out to solve your political problems. And then if you don't like the way we do it, you're going to fire us. So we're not doing that then. We're not going to play that game. You fix your own problems. And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, the incredible cynicism that one gets in work like this, and where do you turn that energy? Uh, Perfectly understandable that sometimes it's turned inward, and so rates of alcoholism and drug abuse and domestic abuse um, skyrocket among the police themselves. So we've got a very, very dysfunctional system going here on this. You know, we wanted to talk a little about the aid to abolish abolition movement and where you differ on it, because I've been trying to listen to all the things you're talking about, and so many things seem to jive with many of their concerns. So I wonder if you could tell me, defund the police, demilitarize communities. I'm reading from the model here, of the movement. Remove police from the schools, free people from jails and prisons, repeal laws that criminalize survival, invest in community self-governance, invest in care, not cops, provide safe housing for everyone. So where are you on with all of that?
What a
And
bunch of nonsense.
think
No,
so?
I think it's tremendous. I think it's tremendous. Yeah, this is exactly what this is, an expression of the movement that I consider myself to be a part of and acting to support however I can. And this is I'm totally in sync with this. Yeah. What that is not a vision of some ultimate goal. That's a set of concrete policies that we could start enacting right now. And that's why that's same thing with the so-called defund the police movement, which is never just about defunding the police. It's about redirecting those resources. That's what we're talking about, is we need to start making concrete changes today. We can't wait for some possible future revolution that then is going to fix everything.
Right.
I think not only is this fantastical, but it's also strategically misguided, because the more we leave that apparatus of policing and prisons in place, it will directly impede our efforts to achieve some future better world. It will surveil us, harass us, imprison us to try to break our movements. It will also divert resources. It will also perpetuate an ideology of individual responsibility and moral failure that absolves institutions and markets of any responsibility and politicians of any responsibility for the mess we're in. So, yeah, we've got to start dismantling this system, as opposed to imagining that these kinds of superficial procedural reforms will fix the problem.
Fix the problem, right? Exactly. But again, we were talking about this at the beginning of the show. That doesn't seem to be happening in New York. There's been a pushback. So what have we gained here in the last few days, and what do we still need to do? It seems like more same of the same old stuff here, right?
So New York is really interesting. So, 5-6 years ago, when de Blasio and the city council, what was really initiated by Melissa Mark Viverito near the MNN studios,
Right,
who
right.
said, we need more police. We need more police to solve our community problems. The community's got a lot of problems, so let's turn it over to police. De Blasio tried to hold the line a little bit on that, but eventually he even gave them more police than they were asking for. We got about 1,300 new police. And at that time, opposition to hiring new police was quite muted. I was against it very publicly. People like Josmar Trujillo, the folks who were doing anti-broken windows work, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, Why Accountability, But the larger formations like Communities United for Police Reform, the big public defender groups, they were largely silent, or they said something only at the last minute about this. This year, even before Minneapolis, there was a broad consensus that the solution is no longer throw a couple of cops in jail, give them body cameras, do some training. Everyone understood that stuff is not going to work, and everyone was calling for defunding and redirecting the police budget. So we ended up actually winning some stuff. You know, there is a reduction there's going to be a reduction in the head count. There's going to be a reduction in some of the operating money. Not a lot, but it's real. And the thing is, we're now organized. Everyone's pretty much on the same page. We're going to be moving forward. People are already making plans for how do we build this out over the next year so that in the next budget, we have more city council votes. We have,
Right.
more momentum.
The elections for city councils next year, right?
Yeah, but they won't be until after the next budget cycle.
I
Or,
see.
or at about, or the primaries will be at about the same time. So we
Right.
won't have new city council members, but what we're going to have is all across the city, we're going to have candidates campaigning on this defund and redirect kind of platform. About 50 something candidates have already signed a pledge along these lines.
Great.
Democratic Socialists of America is going to make this a litmus test for their endorsement. So I think that the whole political conversation is going to look different next year.
Okay, well, that was so the glass is half full, as you put it. So we got a lot of work to go, but we're getting there. We're getting there. What are you working on now with some of your in any new research, or what are you concerning yourself with?
So in the Policing and Social Justice project that I coordinate in New York, we're working a lot on gang policing. The city continues to frame the problems of a lot of communities as being gang problems that can be dealt with through the gang database and gang suppression policing and gang conspiracy cases. And we've seen under de Blasio thousands of young people rounded up in these big conspiracy cases. We did research with Professor Babe Howell working with us did research that showed that these conspiracy cases are largely bogus. These kids aren't connected. A lot of it ended up just being marijuana charges. They can't afford lawyers. These are not big criminal enterprises. This is just the mass criminalization of young people of color in our poorest parts of the city. Nationally, we're working to stop Operation Relentless Pursuit, which is Trump's big anti-crime initiative. He wants to run on a tough on crime platform. So he's flooding 7 cities with federal and money for local cops to work together to get the drug cartels and the international gangs, right? So again, in both cases, this is about turning problems over to police to manage for political gain. And the big question there is, why are all these big city Democratic mayors in Baltimore and Cleveland and Detroit and Albuquerque going along with Trump's reelection campaign by embracing this?
Yeah, that's a key point. I mean, we can understand Trump doing this, but
right,
so-called centrist, moderate Democrats as well. I mean, where's the backbone? Where's the integrity? And
they want to make their downtown real estate deals. They don't really care about the well-being of the neighborhoods. They just want to keep a lid on the problems there so that they can keep getting the campaign money and cozy up to these, major financial interests who don't want to pay taxes.
Yeah. Well, we just had say Walker on the show too. So there's going to be an avalanche of evictions coming up too. So I don't know how that's all going to play out with the real estate developers if in fact these rent strikes continue to grow, and I can't see why they wouldn't, because we're going to have again this avalanche of potential homeless people and evictions. So that has to be, can these so-called Democratic, whatever you want to call them, moderate political leaders still maintain that sort of position in the face of that sort of reality.
Well, a lot of them, we just got to get rid of them. And we're going to have a
Yeah.
real opportunity to do that. And we have gotten rid of some already. I mean, that's part of how we killed that terrible Amazon deal in Queens, was that, AOC had been elected, some progressive city council members had been elected, some state legislators had been elected who weren't beholden to this kind of neoliberal austerity politics, who had a broader kind of democratic socialist analysis and said, no, we're not going to give away the economic future of the city to the richest people in the world, the owners of Amazon.
Mhm.
And that's what we need, people to stand up to that, to demand some real opportunity to build up the outer boroughs, to build up the neighborhoods instead of criminalizing them.
I think it should be brought out too in just a few minutes that we have remaining. This is not just New York or San Francisco. This is throughout the country. I mean, small towns, medium-sized cities, and so on. So this should resonate, and the organizing has to occur across the country. Do you see that happening as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been going to places like St. Louis, Salinas, California,
Mm.
San Antonio, Texas, Jacksonville, Florida. This is happening everywhere, all across. I'm getting calls from Northampton, Worcester, Massachusetts, and can you come to, Durham, North Carolina has been an epicenter of this, and in Nashville, Tennessee, they had budget hearings. And so many people showed up, they went till 5:30 the next morning to take all the testimony that called for defunding the police. So this is a national movement. It's very exciting, closing down jails in Atlanta and the big victory just in St. Louis around the jail there, and dialing back school policing in Milwaukee and Albuquerque, just all over the place.
How about your hometown, Houston?
So I did an event in Houston this morning.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
With a judge there who invited me to come and speak to the legal community. And there were dozens of people from white shoe law firms, other judges, all trying to figure this out. They all understand that we've turned too much over to the police, and it's starved the communities, and it's creating a tremendous amount of injustice. So, we have one of these kind of procedural reformers, Art Acevedo, running the police in Houston, but we've got real people running for city council and stuff. And so I think we're going to see changes there too.
And what are the plans to try to the police that might be laid off? What are, or whatever? How are you trying to work with them? Can they be?
Well, I'm not really. I'm trying to neutralize them. I haven't personally called for a lot of layoffs. I think we can do this through attrition because it takes time to build up these alternative infrastructures.
Okay.
But I'll just remind you of the story I told about the cops who came to see me speak. That it's not that we don't want these young people to have jobs. It's just we don't want those jobs to be as armed police officers. We want them doing positive things for the community, building kids up, repairing past harm, not making their lives worse.
That's a tremendous way to, I think, end the program. It could be said any better. That's really terrific. Listen, Alex, I want you to know that the Radical Imagination is a forum that you're always welcome to be on, and any of your comrades and associates who want to be on, just give me the word and we'll have them on, have that discussion. Fortunately, we did have a Kay coming on. She couldn't make it today, but we'll try to reschedule her for another show as well, for 8 abolition. So, Alex, thank you so very, very much. It's really been enlightening. I think our audience really got a lot out of this. I know they did.
My pleasure, Jim. And Leah, we'll keep the conversation going.
Please
a lot
do.
of great people doing work on the ground in New York who need to be part of this conversation.
They could. This is a forum for them. They could be here anytime they want.
Great.
Thank you so much again, Alex. All the best. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye. And thank you so very, very much. Again, this is Jim Vrettos, and for the Radical Imagination, we'll see you again next week. Take care.
and I'm in the now. And it don't take no x-ray to see right through my smile. I know I be on the go, and it ain't no drink out there that can numb my soul. Oh no. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free. Can you tell me why? Every time I step outside, I see my niggas die. Oh, I'm letting you know that it ain't no gun they make that can kill my soul. Oh no. Say, all we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is take the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is take the chains off. All we wanna do is break the chains off, man. All we wanna do is be free. All we wanna do is be free.
So now it's like the officer's pulling him inside the car. He's trying to pull away. And at no time the officer said that he was going to do anything until he pulled out his weapon. His weapon was drawn, and he said, "I'll shoot you," or "I'm going to shoot." And in the same moment, the first shot went off. And we looked at him. He was shot, and there was blood coming from him. And we took off running.
Are we all alone, fighting on our own? Please give me a chance. I don't wanna dance. Something's got me down. I will stand my ground. Don't just stand around. Don't just stand around.
And as we took off running, I ducked and hid for my life because I was fearing for my life. And I hid by the first car that I saw. My friend, he kept running, and he told me to keep running because he feared for me too. So as he was running, the officer was trying to get out of the car, and once he got out the car, he pursued my friend, but his weapon was drawn. Now, he didn't see any weapon drawn at him or anything like that, us going for no weapon. His weapon was already drawn when he got out the car. He shot again, and once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and he put his hands in the earth, and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots, and my friend died.